Sony spent approximately $400 million making Concord, yet it was played by fewer people than most free browser games. It was on sale for 14 days, but this isn't a story about a bad game. This is a story about talent, time, and money, and why none of it was enough. Concord was a hero shooter, a 5v5 team-based multiplayer game where the player chose from a roster of characters, each with unique abilities, backstories, and visual designs, and competed across a series of maps in various game modes. The genre had been defined by Overwatch in 2016, a game that launched to enormous success and built one of gaming's most dedicated communities. By 2024, the hero shooter space was crowded. Valorant, Apex Legends, Overwatch 2, dozens of smaller entries fighting for the same audience. Concord entered that market at full price, $40 at launch, no free-to-play option, no battle pass to drive initial engagement, just a game you paid for and then played. In 2024, that pricing model for a new hero shooter was just ambitious. It was the first sign that something had gone wrong in the decision-making process. Firewalk Studios was founded in 2018, not a small indie team building something personal, a studio assembled specifically to make a major live service game, staffed with industry veterans from Bungie to Activision to EA and other major publishers. People who had worked on Destiny, Call of Duty, Battlefield, experienced, credentialed, capable developers. Sony acquired Firewalk in 2023, before Concord had launched, before a single player had paid for it. The acquisition was a clear signal. PlayStation believed in what Firewalk was building, enough to buy the studio outright. That acquisition put the financial exposure at an entirely different level. This was no longer a publisher funding a developer's project. This was Sony's own studio, Sony's own game, Sony's own failure. Concord was in development for approximately 8 years. Let that sink in for a minute. 8 years. The same length of time that it took CDPR to go from announcing Cyberpunk 2077 to launching it. Longer than the entire development cycle of most games that define their generation. During those 8 years, the gaming landscape changed completely. In 2016, when Concord's development reportedly began, Overwatch had just launched. The hero shooter was a new and exciting genre. The market wasn't saturated. A well-made entry could find a massive audience. By 2024, the landscape was unrecognizable. Overwatch had launched a free-to-play sequel. Valorant had captured the competitive shooter audience. Apex Legends had redefined Battle Royale. Every major publisher had attempted a live service hero shooter. Most had failed. The game Firewalk had started building in 2016 was entering a 2024 market that had no room for what they were making. And somewhere in those 8 years, nobody stopped to ask whether it still made sense to launch. The warning signs came before launch. Concord ran an open beta in July of 2024, approximately 6 weeks before the game released. The beta was free, anyone could download it and play it. The peak concurrent player on Steam during the opening beta was reportedly around 2,388 players. For context, Helldiver 2, a Sony-published co-op shooter that had launched in earlier 2024, had peaked at around over 450,000 concurrent players at Steam at its height. A game with a fraction of Concord's budget had attracted 250 times the audience. The beta numbers were visible, they were public. Anyone paying attention could have seen them. The discourse around Concord's character design had already become a flashpoint online. Debates about the aesthetic choices, the visual identity of the roster, whether the characters were memorable or distinctive enough to compete in a genre defined by iconic figures. These conversations were loud, and they were everywhere. Sony launched the game anyway. On September 23rd of 2024, 6 weeks after the beta that had attracted fewer players than many games from the early 2000s, Concord went on sale for $40. And the numbers got worse. Concord's peak concurrent players on Steam at its opening day was approximately 697 players. 697. Not 697,000. 697 people. On PlayStation, the numbers were not publicly tracked, but were widely reported to be similarly bad. The player base across both platforms in the same week was estimated to be somewhere between 6 and 10,000, a number that would be considered a failure for a small indie title, let alone a $400 million game from one of gaming's largest publishers. For comparison, games that launched and failed dramatically in the same period had peak player counts in the tens of thousands. Concord's numbers were not in the same conversation. The gaming internet reacted immediately, not in anger, but something closer to bewilderment. How had this happened? How had a studio of experienced developers, backed by one of the world's largest gaming publishers, with 8 years of development time and a reported $400 million budget, produced a game that fewer than 1,000 people were playing simultaneously on its opening day? What followed launch was not a slow bleed of a struggling game fighting its audience. It was a cliff. 695 peak concurrent players on Steam. Day 3, the numbers had dropped even further. Day 7, Concord was averaging fewer than 200 concurrent players. Day 10. Some sessions were recording fewer than 100 players across the entire Steam platform simultaneously. The game that had cost $400 million to make couldn't find a single server. And on September 3rd of 2024, just 11 days after launch, Sony made an announcement. Concord would be taken offline on September 6th. The players who had purchased the game would receive a full refund. 14 days after it launched, Concord was gone. It wasn't patched, it wasn't discounted, it wasn't released as a free-to-play. It was gone. The servers went dark on September 6th of 2024, and Concord ceased to exist as a live product. It had been on sale for 14 days. In the entire history of major AAA gaming, no title with this level of investment had been removed from sales so quickly. Sony's official statement was brief. They said that Concord had not met expectations, that they needed to explore options. For months after the shutdown, the gaming world waited for an announcement, a relaunch as a free-to-play, a reworked version, something. In December of 2024, 3 months after the shutdown, Sony confirmed that Concord had been permanently cancelled. Not paused, not retooled. Cancelled. 8 years of development, $400 million, and a studio of industry veterans. A publisher with virtually unlimited resources. 14 days of sales, and then nothing. Fireworks Studios was subsequently shut down entirely. The people who had spent 8 years building Concord, who had moved cities, changed jobs, dedicated years of their professional lives to this project, were told it was over. The human cost of Concord is the part of the story that gets the least attention and deserves the most. So how did this happen? How does a gaming company spend $400 million, a number larger than the GDP of some small nations, on a project that 14 days of public availability proved the market didn't want? The honest answer is that nobody knows completely. Sony has never given a full account. Fireworks developers have largely stayed quiet. The internal decision-making that led to launch day remains opaque, but the outlines of what went wrong are visible. The first failure was the 8 years of development cycle itself. A game designed for a 2016 market launched in 2024. The genre had moved on. The audience had moved on. The pricing expectations had moved on. Free-to-play had become a standard for most hero shooters, not a premium option. Nobody internally appears to have made a call to fundamentally reassess what Concord needed to be given and how much the landscape had changed. The second failure was the beta data. The numbers from July 2024 were not hidden, they were public. A peak of 2,388 players during a free beta for a game that launched at $40 is not a green light. It's a fire alarm. That alarm was either not heard or not acted upon. The third failure is the most uncomfortable one. Sony had acquired Firewalk in 2023. Having spent the money to buy the studio, there may have been an institutional reluctance to also accept that the product wasn't viable. In corporate psychology, this is called the sunk cost fallacy. The money is already spent, so you keep spending more rather than accepting the loss. By the time Concord launched, Sony had spent so much on studio acquisitions, on the development budget, on the marketing, that stopping felt more expensive than continuing. And well, it wasn't. 14 days of sales proved that it wasn't. The gaming industry looked at Concord and drew the wrong lessons. The conversations that followed the shutdown focused almost entirely on the character designs, specifically whether the aesthetic choices had pushed away a potential audience. It's the simplest explanation, which is likely why it's also the most frequently repeated one. But the character design did not kill Concord. The market killed Concord. And the failure to read the market, despite 8 years of evidence that it wasn't changing and 6 weeks of beta proving the game wasn't connecting, is the lesson the industry should have taken from this. The gaming landscape in 2024 was littered with failed live service hero shooters. Battleborn, Lawbreakers, Hyenas, Knockout City. Game after game after game launched into the same crowded space and failed for the same reasons. They were asking players to commit their time and money to a new multiplayer ecosystem when established ecosystems had already owned their attention. Concord was not an outlier. It was a logical conclusion of an industry trend that had been visible for years. What the industry should have learned, and clearly has not fully absorbed, is that no amount of budget, no level of studio pedigree, and no degree of design quality can create an audience that simply isn't there. You cannot spend $400 million into a community that doesn't want to exist. The market is not impressed by investments. The market plays what it wants to play, and in 2024, it did not want to play Concord. Here's the thing about Concord that gets lost in the numbers. The game itself, the actual product that 697 people played simultaneously on its best day, was not without craft. The environments were detailed, the animations were polished, the audio design was good. 8 years of work by talented people is visible in every frame of footage that exists. Concord failed not because it was made without care. It failed because care is not enough. Because talent is not enough. Because budget is not enough. The gaming industry is the only entertainment medium where the most expensive products can fail more completely than the cheapest ones. where a game made by three people in a bedroom can find tens of millions of players, while a $400 million game finds 600. That isn't an argument against ambition. It is an argument for honesty, for the ability to look at a beta with 2,388 people and say, clearly, open, without corporate language, that this isn't working, for the courage to stop before 14 days of sales make the decision for you. Concord servers are dark, Firewalk Studio is closed, and the people who made it have moved on to other things. $400 million, 8 years, 14 days, the most expensive lesson in gaming history, and the industry is still deciding whether or not it learned.